Every year, Americans purchase nearly 600 million pounds of candy for Halloween. It is a season of pure, sugary joy. Yet for decades, a dark shadow has loomed over this tradition, a persistent urban legend of strangers poisoning candy. But this widespread fear, this modern-day myth that has led to X-rayed candy and community trunk-or-treats, wasn't born from a random act of madness. It can be traced back to one specific night, one specific family, and one man whose greed would forever taint an innocent holiday. Tonight, we unravel the story of Ronald Clark O'Bryan, a seemingly ordinary father who, on Halloween night, committed an unthinkable crime that would earn him the chilling nickname, the Candyman. We followed the determined investigators who pieced together the truth behind a father's lies, revealing a cold-blooded motive that turned a simple Halloween treat into an instrument of death. This is the chilling true story of the man who forever scarred a beloved holiday. Before we begin this dark chronicle, let's recall a moment from our own pasts. What was your biggest, most irrational fear as a kid during Halloween? Was it a particular monster from a scary movie, the eerie silence of a haunted house, or the pervasive idea of tampered candy? Share your memory in the comments below. It's a fascinating look at how shared stories and fears shape our traditions. Now, let's travel back to a time when that fear was not yet a legend, but a horrifying, emerging reality. Picture the scene. It's Halloween night, 1974, in the quiet suburb of Deer Park, Texas. The air is crisp, filled with the laughter of children dressed as ghosts, superheroes, and monsters. Front porches are adorned with jack-o'-lanterns, their flickering grins casting dancing shadows across manicured lawns. This is the golden age of trick-or-treating, a ritual of pure childhood innocence, where the only thing to fear was getting a rock instead of a candy bar. It was a perfect night. In this idyllic setting, one family was about to embark on a night that would end not in a sugar rush, but in unimaginable tragedy. Among the trick-or-treaters that evening was the O'Bryan family. At its head was Ronald Clark O'Bryan, a 30-year-old optician, known in his community as a deacon at the local Baptist church. He was a family man, out with his wife, Danine, and their two young children, 8-year-old Timothy and 5-year-old Elizabeth. They joined a neighbor and his children, forming a small, happy group, moving from door to door, their plastic pumpkins slowly filling with treats. To any outside observer, they were the picture of a perfect American family enjoying a cherished tradition. But behind Ronald O'Bryan's fatherly facade, a monstrous plan was already in motion. As the night wore on and the children grew tired, the group started to head home. But Ronald had one last stop in mind. He ran ahead of the group toward a house at the end of the block that was conspicuously dark with no lights on. He returned a few minutes later with a triumphant find: 5 giant 22-inch Pixy Stix, the powdered candy straws loved by kids. He claimed the residents had just opened the door and handed them over. He gave one to Timothy, one to Elizabeth, one to his neighbor's child, and 2 more to other children they knew. It was a strange story, but in the excitement of the night, no one questioned it too deeply.
Later that evening, before bed, young Timothy O'Bryan asked for one final treat. His father, Ronald, suggested the giant Pixy Stix he had acquired from the dark house. Timothy tore it open and poured the powder into his mouth, but immediately complained that it tasted bitter. To wash the taste away, his father gave him a glass of Kool-Aid. Moments later, Timothy began to vomit and convulse violently.
He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Less than an hour after eating the candy, 8-year-old Timothy O'Bryan was pronounced dead. The cause of his death was a complete mystery. In the immediate aftermath, Ronald O'Bryan played the part of a grieving father. Yet, those closest to him and the police who were called to the hospital couldn't help but notice his strangely calm and controlled demeanor. He spoke about his son's death in a detached, almost clinical way, focusing more on procedural details than on the emotional devastation of his loss. This unsettling lack of grief was the first tiny crack in his facade. It was a red flag that investigators filed away. While the community mourned the tragic, accidental death of a child, a darker suspicion began to take root in the minds of the detectives on the case. The case took a terrifying turn when police discovered the other 4 Pixy Stix. Ronald, in his apparent grief, made sure to tell investigators that he had given the same candy to his daughter Elizabeth and 3 other children. This instantly transformed the situation from a personal tragedy into a city-wide emergency. Police raced through the night, tracking down the other children. In one instance, they arrived at a home just in time, waking a family to find their child asleep with the poisoned candy clutched in his hand, ready to be eaten in the morning. By a miracle, none of the other 4 children had consumed the powder. This was a critical turning point. Initially, the police pursued the most obvious theory. A Halloween sadist was on the loose, a random maniac who had poisoned candy and handed it out to unsuspecting children. The story ignited a wave of panic across Houston and the entire country. Parents emptied their children's candy bags onto floors, searching for anything that looked suspicious. But for the lead investigators, Ronald O'Bryan's story of the dark house didn't add up. Why would he be the only one to receive these giant, unusual candies? And why would the residents of a dark house suddenly produce them? The story was flimsy, and the police were about to tear it apart. You know, a case like this shows how a single evil act can create a ripple effect of fear that lasts for generations. It's a powerful reminder of how fragile our sense of safety can be. If you find this exploration of the dark side of human nature compelling, please consider subscribing to True Chronicles. We're dedicated to bringing you meticulously researched deep dives into the cases that have shaped our world, and you won't want to miss our next investigation. The detectives' first step was to retrace the O'Bryan family's trick-or-treating route. When they arrived at the dark house Ronald had described, they found that his entire story was a fabrication. The owner of the home was an air traffic controller who had been at work until 11 p.m. that night. He had the receipts to prove it. He confirmed that his lights had been off, and he had given out absolutely no candy. It was a lie. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation entirely.
The police were no longer hunting for a random monster. All eyes were now on Ronald Clark O'Bryan. Why would a father lie about something so trivial on the night his son died? The investigators started digging into Ronald's life, and they quickly found the motive. He was drowning in debt. Despite his respectable job as an optician, O'Bryan was in financial ruin, owing over $100,000, a massive sum in 1974. He was on the verge of having his car repossessed and his home foreclosed upon. He had a history of changing jobs, borrowing money he couldn't repay, and was described by those who knew him as a man obsessed with appearances, desperate to project an image of success that was crumbling around him. He was a desperate man. The financial motive solidified when detectives made a shocking discovery. In the months leading up to Halloween, Ronald O'Bryan had taken out substantial life insurance policies on both of his children, Timothy and Elizabeth. The total payout for their deaths would be $60,000. Just hours after Timothy was pronounced dead, Ronald had called the insurance company to inquire about collecting on the policy.
The pieces were now falling into place, painting a sickening picture of a man who saw his own children not as family, but as a solution to his financial problems. The murder was not a random act. It was a calculated business transaction.
The final piece of the puzzle came from an unlikely source, a chemical supply store in Houston. The owner testified that a man, whom he later identified as O'Bryan, had come into his store shortly before Halloween asking to buy cyanide. The owner told him he didn't sell to the public without proper credentials. O'Bryan then asked a chilling question: how much cyanide would be lethal? After being turned away, O'Bryan found another source.
Investigators confirmed he had visited a chemical company and, by lying about his profession and needs, had managed to sign for a container of potassium cyanide. He had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. On November 5th, 1974, just 5 days after he murdered his son, Ronald Clark O'Bryan was arrested. The community was stunned. The man they knew as a church deacon was now accused of an unthinkable crime. During his trial, the media dubbed him the Candyman, a name that would stick with him for the rest of his life. His defense was weak, claiming the poisoned candy was part of a plot by a disgruntled former employee to get revenge on him. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution methodically laid out his lies, his debts, his insurance policies, and his search for cyanide. It was a textbook case of premeditated murder.
In June 1975, it took the jury just 46 minutes to find Ronald Clark O'Bryan guilty of capital murder. The judge handed down the only sentence appropriate for such a monstrous crime: death by lethal injection. O'Bryan spent years on death row, maintaining his innocence to the end. On March 31, 1984, nearly 10 years after he killed his son, his sentence was carried out. As he was executed, a crowd of hundreds gathered outside the prison walls. While some protested the death penalty, others cheered, and a group of them yelled, "Trick or treat." It was a grim, poetic end for the man who had weaponized the holiday. O'Bryan's crime was so shocking that it created a permanent scar on the holiday, leading to the rise of hospital candy X-rays and supervised trunk-or-treat events. He didn't just kill his son, he murdered a piece of childhood innocence for an entire generation. His greed created a ghost story that we still tell to this day.
Thank you for joining us at True Chronicles. If this case fascinated you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true crime content every week. Stay vigilant, and we'll see you in the next investigation.